without further ado, please welcome Dr. Mike Fidanza. Mike?
Okay, thank you, John, and for that gracious introduction. Thank you, Ed, for taking care of all the CEUs. That's a Herculean task. For several years, I was conducting the Eastern Pennsylvania Turfgrass Conference and had to get the CEUs for that. So that's no easy feat. The Crop Science Society of America, that's our big turfgrass nerd science society that we all belong to. But thank you for having me today. I listed the date on here incorrectly. Today, obviously, is May 5th. So happy Cinco de Mayo, everyone. And you celebrate Cinco de Mayo. I think you want to probably, you want me to move this seminar along right away so we can get to the festivities. So let's get right to it. Thank you, FMC, for hosting this educational webinars. I've enjoyed conducting these and participating in these, and I also enjoy listening in on many as well. Let's see, here we go. Well, just before I start, I always like to find humor in things, and this is from a Twitter site, and perhaps this might be an answer to our labor shortage. I have two dogs at home here, two pooches, a small one and a big one, and if I could help train them to help me, maybe my job will be a lot easier. But this is what I'd like to talk about today, and I'll keep my eye on the time here. We'll talk about plant pathology and the plant disease triangle. As a trained plant pathologist, I'm almost required by law to discuss that. We'll touch on some diseases of cool season lawns and warm season lawns. We're not going to talk about every disease. And then fairy ring, I get a lot of questions on fairy ring, and I've done a lot of work with fairy ring over the years. And then we'll talk about the granular fungicides now that we have available for disease management in our lawns. So hopefully this will be an informative webinar for everyone today. Just real quick, so I'm a professor at Penn State. Penn State University Park is located in the middle of the state, and this perhaps is for the benefit of those outside of Pennsylvania. One of my former students is logged on here today. Penn State University Park, that's the main campus. It's located in the center of the state. That's the campus where we have the football team. And there are about 20 branch campuses scattered throughout the state of Pennsylvania. These are small campuses, 1,000 or 2,000 students, maybe a little more. And typically students start out there their first 2 years, and then their third and fourth year up at University Park. But I'm located at the Berks campus. It's Berks County. And the city is Reading, Pennsylvania, like the Reading Railroad if you play Monopoly. And just west of Philadelphia here in southeastern Pennsylvania. Just a little bit about me as well. I write an article every month for Golf Course Management magazine. It's called the Vidor. It's a monthly column. What I try to do is summarize a research article. I take the research article and I distill it down into something of practical, try to get into the historical background of the research, why it was done, how it was done, but more importantly, what can we learn from this research? Too often, maybe not too often, but oftentimes, we read about these research and papers and research projects, but I'm always trying to find out, okay, this is what was discovered with the research, this is what we found, how can we apply it? And then every other month, or Golf Course Management comes out monthly, 12 issues a year. Turf Producers International Turf News comes out 6 times a year, and I write an article in here as well with Dr. Cale Bigelow at Purdue University. So it's a real honor to do this for the industry, and it forces me to read up on these articles and keep up to date on things. It's really enjoyable. Another thing that I want to share with you, I just published this book. I'm sorry to sound like a commercial here. Achieving Sustainable Turfgrass Management. It was published in January of this year, 2023. There's 20 chapters relating to all things turf, physiology and breeding and soil management and irrigation maintenance practices. There's the chapter 8 on ornamental lawns, stresses, disease, insect weed management, biostimulants, etc. Some case studies. So it's basically an up-to-date textbook of all things turf related, turf grass science related. And it was my job to get everyone involved here to present the latest and greatest information in turf science, which I did. And I want to say, my wife was telling me, "Oh, this must be a nice accomplishment for you." Yeah, this is a nice accomplishment, putting this textbook together. But last night was, I thought, even a better accomplishment. I'll just share with you. My older brother was on a bowling team, Thursday night men's league, they call it. And I'm a substitute to bench once in a while if they need me. So they needed me to bowl last night. And I bowled a 236, which is the best I've ever done. I had 8 strikes. I don't know where that came from. I was so proud of my accomplishment. I told my wife all about it. And she told me to shut up and go to bed, I discounted my whole accomplishment. So I know this textbook is great. Bowling at 236, I thought was a little bit better. But anyhow, this textbook is available. I'm not going to write a book on bowling. I can't do that. But this textbook's available. Burley Dodds, go on the website. You can find it, or on Amazon. But anyway, just want to share that with you. There's other textbooks. I want to share with you some other resources. This one, the Turf Disease Handbook, that was from the late Dr. Houston Couch, Virginia Tech. That guy was amazing. He was great. He published this book on turf diseases for lawns, lawn care for lawns, and that should be revised. Dr. Rick Lattin has a book on turf fungicides, which is a very good, second edition now. And then the Compendium of Turfgrass Diseases just came out, the 4th edition. APS Press, the American Phytopathology Society, the Plant Pathology Society. This is a very good book. It's it's like a sort of like a thick magazine, really succinct. Every disease, every turfgrass disease, or mostly every disease, is listed there. Background information on the biology and management practices. It's in a good book. It's affordable. Everyone should have this on their shelf. Really. It's just an updated information on turfgrass diseases. And that compendium is by many authors, me included. There's anybody who's everybody, and everybody or anybody in turf pathology management contributed to that. So anyway, there's some educational materials for your bookshelf. Consider that. I also want to share this with you. I get this question a lot about lawns, and I promise to stay on topic here, but people say, "Oh, the lawns are just terrible. They're a big waste of time, green space." And then somebody read somewhere where lawns are the most irrigated crop in the United States. Absolutely not true. In an article, but there's we have many acres of lawns. Almost, let me see if I can. Oops, let me go back here. 31 million acres of lawns. About a little over 2 million acres of golf courses, 91 million acres of corn. And I tell people, well, lawns are not the most irrigated crop. Every lawn, every square foot of lawn is not irrigated. I mean, I live in my neighborhood. I have about 130 houses here in my neighborhood. I think there are 2 lawns that are irrigated or have irrigation, and I hardly ever use them. Anyway, so I just want to keep that in perspective. Something to keep in mind when you're dealing with folks that may not be too favorable for lawns or turfgrass management. Lawns are certainly not the most irrigated crop. We leave that to our agricultural crops, and I'm glad they are irrigated, because we need those ag crops. Anyway, let's get to some plant pathology stuff. What is a disease? Just an abnormal structure or function of the plant caused by an infectious agent. It's caused by a pathogen, a disease-causing agent. The symptoms of the disease, and we teach this in Turf 101 and Plant Pathology 101, you get lesions, leaf lesions, blighting, necrosis, chlorosis. It just doesn't look healthy. It looks sick. And then that's symptoms, but signs of the pathogen, that's evidence of the pathogen. This could be mycelium. Underneath the microscope, we see these little spores or conidia or structures. This is little sort of fungal structures that produce spores. So these are actual evidence of the pathogen. So when you diagnose diseases, you look for the symptoms, visual symptoms, and then you look for signs, if you can, of the pathogen. Oftentimes you need a microscope, but sometimes you can, you'll see mycelium and other things with the naked eye that can confirm the pathogen. Again, with diseases like pythium and snow molds and all these kinds of diseases, they're often associated with prolonged periods of leaf wetness, and we're going to talk about that. And you often get mycelium, just the sort of vegetative part of the fungus. And this is a Twitter post that mycelium is looking spooky this morning. It's it actually was not mycelium, but spider webs. So you got to be careful when you see spider webs, webbing on the turf. Okay, that's not mycelium, that's just some insects. But anyway, something to keep in mind, the plant disease triangle. Okay, we've all heard about this before. You need the host, pathogen, and environmental interaction for these diseases to occur. You need a susceptible host, which are turf grasses, they are. Pathogen has to be present, which it is. And oftentimes it's environmental conditions that predispose the host and make the host perhaps more susceptible to pathogen infection. Environment meaning, time of year, prolonged periods of leaf wetness, rainfall, heat, drought stress, that kind of thing. All three have to work together. And again, most of our fungal diseases are caused by fungi, and we're talking about really the focus should be on environmental or weather conditions that are associated with these diseases. Again, most of our diseases are caused by fungi. Nematodes can infect roots, obviously, and weaken the plant, predisposing turf to other infections. Yeah, we have some other bacterial infections things, but for the most part, our turf grass diseases are caused by these microscopic fungi. So really the plant disease triangle really is actually a pyramid, because you have the host, pathogen, environment, but then that fourth factor is time, prolonged periods of leaf wetness or humidity or environmental stresses that really make it a pyramid, not so much a triangle. Think about this, time of year, something that you can do, maybe you're doing it already, you may not even realizing this. You're looking at a calendar, and there's certain times of year you're going to see certain diseases. There's a low risk, moderate, or high risk time of year, often associated, not so much, yes, it's calendar based, but the calendar base is related to weather. We got spring weather, we got hot, humid summer weather, fall, winter season. So think about the time of year when you see these diseases occurring at your locations, and think about the weather conditions, the environmental conditions when you see these diseases. And over time, you can make your own sort of chart like this. This is from Dr. Rick Lattin at Purdue. He retired, and Derek Settle put this slide together, basically listing many different types of diseases and the times of year when they're most likely to be present. Okay, so not every disease is going to occur at every time, and not every fungal disease and not every turf grass disease affects every turf species. Okay, certain fungal pathogens infect certain species. Okay, so that's something you got to keep in mind. Anyway, so again, think about the turf species, bluegrass or your ryegrass or your fine fescues, the symptoms, the visual symptoms, and the environmental conditions. You put that together, you're almost, you sort of have to be a detective, and diagnose these kinds of diseases. Again, warm season grass versus cool season grass. We have folks from all over the United States, and I think that's great. And I think that's great that FMC has an opportunity to do this. Don't forget about our cool season grasses have this sort of bimodal growth curve. And in the summer months, there's a lot of abiotic stresses that can occur. Warm season grasses, again, not a bimodal growth curve, but abiotic stresses can occur in the spring and going into the winter. So just keep this in mind, okay? And don't forget, I always like to show this slide. At the end of the day, we're managing turf diseases and plant health and put all that together. We're talking about sunlight, water, air, nutrients, soil. That's so important to managing turf. So in the interest of time, we don't overstep our time here. Let's look at some diseases of cool season lawns, just a few of the more common ones that we're running into. First one is red thread, and the pathogen, again, as a plant pathologist, we have to memorize the fungal pathogen name. So I think this might be on your quiz actually. So the pathogen Lataceria fusiformis, there's also one cousin that's called pink patch. But whether you have red thread or pink patch, they're kind of sort of basically the same. Lataceria fusiformis, red thread, typically a disease of the spring weather, cold, wet, cloudy, overcast weather. Now here in southeastern Pennsylvania, during the first week of April, it was really warm and everybody thought, oh, summer is here. This is great. We're going right from winter to summer. That's outstanding. Well, the rest of the month of April was really cold. It's even cold today. My little dog, my Jack Russell Terrier, he's walking around. He has a sweater on because my wife said he was shivering. That's how cold it is. So spring is not ready to give up its grip on us yet. We're not ready for summer yet, at least weather-wise. So with a disease like red thread, cloudy, overcast weather, for our cool season grasses, they're coming out of winter dormancy. They're trying to green up. We just need some sunshine. We need some good growth conditions. Perennial ryegrass is really susceptible to red thread, as well as other cool season grasses and warm season grasses, but particularly the ryegrasses, it seems. But anyway, all turf grasses are susceptible to this disease, and it's commonly associated with low fertility, undernourished turf. As you would think, coming out of winter dormancy, our cool season grasses especially would be a little hungry, a little lean. And so, again, think of a time of year, most of the time you'll see this disease in the spring months. I've seen it down in the summer and a little bit in the fall. And you get these sort of blighted patches, small little circular patches, little sunken patches. And the thing about red thread is interesting. So this will occur like March or April, and if the fungus progresses, colonizes the leaves, causes sort of blighting. This little patch here can get warmed up a little earlier from the sun. The soil underneath can get warmed up a little, or just a little microclimate thing where you're going to get crabgrass germinating perhaps a little bit sooner, or goosegrass, or knotweed. So here you have a situation where you have a disease occurring, and it sort of creates an environment perhaps more favorable for some weed germination and emergence. And anyway, it's called red thread because you get these red sort of sclerotial structures, fungal structures. You can see this with the naked eye or a hand lens. It's really, really cool to see it from a plant pathology point of view. Again, you see these sort of sunken reddish, pinkish patches. You see these mycelial flocks. Again, just the evidence of the fungus. That's an up-close look at red thread. This is, again, just a fungal structure. It's a foliar disease, colonizing and infecting the leaf tissues. Now, management-wise, again, late spring, late winter, early spring conditions, extended periods of, say, cloudy, overcast weather, rainy spring weather. If you have a lawn that's infected with red thread and you're mowing the lawn, you can move the clippings around, and sure, you can spread those sort of mycelial pieces around and spread the infection around. So you got to be careful there. But typically this low nitrogen piece, again, lawns that are hungry and lean tend to be more predisposed to red thread. And so one of the best ways you can manage it is add a little nitrogen to have, when you subject the lawns to your spring fertilizer programs, things like that. When you start to feed your lawns, they can hopefully grow out of these symptoms. There's some research that showed nitrogen, and along with some potassium, helps improve recovery. Mowing height and frequency, we talk about this a lot. Raise the mowing height. Anything you can do to improve turf health. Clippings, if you're dealing with a site that's actively raging with red thread and even other foliar diseases, it's a good idea to collect the clippings. You don't want to move the clippings around and spread the infection. We're going to talk about fungicides a little later, but there's a way to go about you can use fungicides for red thread. It's a relatively easy fungus to control with most fungicides, going at it preventatively before the disease occurs, or curatively when it's active, when the disease is active. It's easier to manage these diseases preventatively. Once the disease gets hold and infection is happening, maybe more of a challenge to go after these diseases curatively, so to speak. But again, we'll talk about this in a moment. Clippings, like you see on golf courses, often collect clippings, and do this on your lawns if you can. If you have an active raging infection site of red thread, good idea to collect the clippings so you don't spread the infection around. Scalping, don't do this. I know you don't, you're professionals. But again, just as a reminder with sort of the plant health thing, that this injury to turf can really cause, well, it weakens the turf and it predisposes it to fungal infection, such as, again, keeping the mower blade sharp. Here you have a sharpened mower blade with clean edges. Here you have unsharpened with these jagged edges. And the red thread fungus can easily penetrate into the tips of these leaf sheaths and leaf blades, cause infection. Other fungal pathogens can do that as well. So here's something, just good sound cultural practices, and can help mitigate the infection process. Don't be like my one neighbor who bought a lawnmower a few years ago, and I asked him if he ever sharpened the blade, and he looked at me like I was like, what kind of question is that? I guess he assumed the blades were self-sharpening, but I had a nice little conversation. Okay, you know, the blades were dull as heck, but anyway, I got him on the right path to take the mower blades down to hardware store and get it taken care of. Actually, right? Yeah, I want to make sure because we have Cinco de Mayo to get to, right? So, summer. I want to talk about summer patch. So we talk about red thread, and then think about red thread primarily in the cool season grass world, affecting ryegrasses. Summer patch is an interesting one in that it affects primarily Kentucky bluegrasses, annual bluegrass, if you're dealing with bentgrass, poa greens. But our Kentucky bluegrass lawns, this is a big problem for them. And then some of our fine leaf fescues. This disease can infect our fine leaf fescues. But bluegrass, back in the day when this disease first showed up, folks thought, well, it could be just nematodes chewing on the roots. They thought it perhaps was a fusarium type, which is a fungus that's found in soils, it's found in agricultural soils. But eventually, folks at the University of Rhode Island determined that it was caused by a new pathogen, a previously undocumented pathogen, this magnaporthe, and it infects roots. This is a root disease. Well, the fungus colonizes the roots early in the spring, but you don't really see the symptoms until the middle of the summer, when those roots are just, they're not functioning. They can't take in water and nutrients. And so the turf starts dying out. And so you get these circular patches, the discoloration of the leaves. It looks like drought stress. Again, visually, you'll see the turf suffer in the middle of the summer. If you have soil that's compacted or wet soils, any soil or root zone that's not favorable for root growth, those sites are more susceptible to summer patch disease. Again, it's typically a summer disease. The actual infection can occur March, April timeframe, around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Soil temps start warming up. You'll get the infection process happening. And oftentimes a preventative fungicide should occur here in March or April. Don't wait till the middle of the summer. They used to call this, and they still do, a frog eye pattern. In other words, you have the bluegrass around here is all infected, which you might have in the middle of you may have a bunch type clump of ryegrass or a clump of tall fescue. So it gives what they used to call this a frog eye pattern. And anyway, so you get this is again a root pathogen affecting roots, colonizing the roots. You get this. You don't necessarily have to have a very distinct circular frog eye pattern. It could be diffuse. There's a famous picture from 1966. This is a Professor Bean at the University of Maryland. He was called to the White House. Lyndon Johnson was president. And the Kentucky bluegrass lawn there was just inundated with summer patch. There was a famous photo of Lyndon Johnson giving a press conference on the White House lawn, and you could see it was totally devastated by the disease. And a little historical background there. That photo came from Dr. Houston Couch, by the way, years ago. Anyway, conditions that favor disease, again, in the summertime, high temperatures, heat, humidity, heat stress, drought stress. Those bluegrass plants are going to struggle, particularly if their roots aren't functioning. And south-facing slopes, again, just think of warmer temps there. Again, sites that those lawns that are mowed really low, that adds extra stress. Again, I have another neighbor who mows his lawn really low all the time. I don't know why. His lawns really become weeds now because he just continues to stress the turf out with the low mowing. But these are some cultural practices that can predispose bluegrass to infection with summer patch. Again, if you're really into this, you look on a microscope and you see these little runner hyphae infecting the xylem tissues in the roots, causing the plumbing to sort of clog up there, and the roots can't access water and nutrients. So how do you deal with summer patch? Increase the mowing height. First of all, anything you can do to alleviate any stress to the roots, increase the mowing height. If you're in a situation where you're irrigating, try to avoid the light, frequent irrigating, watering, because you don't want to maintain this sort of upper surface wetness. You want to irrigate deeply and infrequently so the water can really move through that profile. You don't want to saturate the soil, basically what we're trying to say. Acidifying the soil helps. Using slow release coated products, poly-coated, sulfur coated, any coated products help a slow release. Those dealing with putting greens, they like to use ammonium sulfate because it helps acidify the rhizosphere. Research has showed that if you apply the majority of nitrogen in the fall, with most of its slow release, that helps to strengthen the roots. What you're trying to do is strengthen the roots to deal with any kind of infection, alleviate soil compaction. This is your cultivation and aeration programs. And thatch, if you have lawns with a lot of thatch that harbors summer patch. There's some bluegrasses now, and this is a big part of turf disease management, is using these resistant species and cultivars when you can. If you're in a position to renovate or establish new lawns and sites, do your homework and check around and see what areas, what in your area, what cultivars are more disease resistant or disease tolerant. Okay. Again, cultural practices: manage your thatch, water deeply, increase mowing height. These are, again, just basic cultural management practices. I want to just slide into brown patch real quick. This was caused by Rhizoctonia solani. This Rhizoctonia, and John, you mentioned where these diseases come from. Rhizoctonia is a pathogen of all kinds of agricultural crops. It's in soils everywhere. It affects potatoes, tomatoes, corn, soybeans, wheat. Every crop known to man is infected with Rhizoctonia. It's everywhere. This particular fungus causes brown patch, circular brown patches in the lawn. When you look at these brown dead patches, you'll see these lesions, very distinct lesions, especially on tall fescue. Brown patch doesn't affect bluegrass that much. It can really hammer, so to speak, perennial ryegrass. It's really problematic on tall fescue lawns here in the Mid-Atlantic region because of the hot summer days, heat, humidity, prolonged leaf wetness. And historically, brown patch was associated with high nitrogen applications. This goes back to the 20s and 30s when folks were putting a lot of nitrogen on lawns. That may not hold. But the best way to manage brown patch is typical cultural practice, proper mowing, fertilization, irrigation practices. Genetics plays a key role here. There are tall fescues out there now that are more tolerant to brown patch. And I just want to shout out to Jada Powlin. She's a PhD graduate student at Purdue who's conducted her whole PhD program on brown patch in lawns. So I would reach out to Jada and have her do one of these seminars and focus on brown patch because she has all kinds of information on water irrigation and nitrogen rates and times and nitrogen sources. So just keep that in mind. Real quick, some of the work I did years ago on brown patch looked at irrigation, irrigating in the morning versus irrigating at night. This is on a perennial ryegrass site. And when you irrigated at night, yeah, we had much more disease. Why? Well, it's prolonged leaf wetness. We created a nice, wet, saturated environment. Fungus loved it. When we irrigated in the morning, we didn't get much disease. I think maybe we were just knocking the mycelium off the foliage. Maybe it's a physical disruption thing. I think it was perhaps we weren't getting those prolonged periods of leaf wetness. So anyway, even with the fungicide, irrigating at night started to see that fungicide break down. So fungicides may not be, magical tools in themselves. They are very good tools, but they have to be used in conjunction with good cultural practices to get the most out of the fungicide. Okay, real quick, disease of worm season grass. I promise I'll keep this on time. Gray leaf spot. This one is caused by Pericularia, if I can pronounce it right on a Friday. Gray leaf spot is also a problem on perennial ryegrass. And for those of you managing St. Augustine grass, wow, this could be a devastating disease. And look at that photo from our buddies at University of Florida. Fungus, again, a foliar disease. The pathogen just spreads by these little spores. And with water, with rain, it rains in Florida a lot. It just munches away at those leaves. And it could leave the St. Augustine grass lawn just this chlorotic mess. Okay. Extended periods of leaf wetness, hot, humid weather, rainy weather, evidently down in the Florida region, down south, as they say up here. May through September is the nice time of year for gray leaf spot. We tend to get gray leaf spot up here on a ryegrass in August, September, later in the summer. It's there, it's here now, but we don't really see symptoms until in August, September. When we get those late summer rains, we tend to get those a lot. So anyhow, your St. Augustine grasses, if they're under stress, that again, it predisposes those grasses to infection. You see the theme here, any kind of abiotic stress, mismanagement of cultural practices, predisposing these lawns to certain diseases. Excessive nitrogen applications with St. Augustine grass. Be careful, you get this flush of growth, and those newly emerged leaves are more susceptible to gray leaf spot. What's interesting with these St. Augustine cultivars, there's many different ones. I'm not familiar with a lot of them though, but there's differences in susceptibility to St. Augustine to gray leaf spot. So some of these are really susceptible, and others are somewhat tolerant or almost resistant. So keep that in mind. Again, genetics can play a key role here in helping to manage these diseases. There are some cultivars that are more resistant than others. Okay, so let's get to fairy ring, because I get this question a lot. You see these mushrooms growing in a circle. Okay, the first question I get is, can you eat these mushrooms? I say no, please don't. But for our viewing audience here, you may not realize I grew up on a mushroom farm in southeastern Pennsylvania. So my father grew the white button agaricus mushrooms that you find in the grocery store. Some of these mushrooms, they could be edible. Many of them are poisonous. And an old timer once told me, well, every mushroom is edible once. So don't take any chances of eating mushrooms in the wild. Go to the grocery store. But you'll see these mushrooms popping up after a heavy rainfall event often, and they grow out in a circle, sort of radially. And you'll see these mushrooms popping up, and you can sort of mow them off. Don't worry, now those mushrooms are producing spores, but if you mow them off, you're not going to spread around. You're not going to spread these mushrooms around, because these spores they've been, like I said, they've been here longer than plants. So don't worry about that. But oftentimes what you see, this is a photo of a tree that was cut down, and you see the lateral roots. You see the mushrooms sort of colonizing the roots. These mushrooms, these fairy ring mushrooms, these fairy ring fungi, they're basidiomycetes. The basidiomycetes are wood decaying fungi. They're breaking down the wood, breaking down the lignin. That's their whole purpose in life. Okay. Perhaps it was the first reported turf disease going back to 1563. It was written about in Nature magazine in 1884. Visually, typically we see type 1 symptoms, which are dead necrotic rings and dead zones. Type 2 are the dark green rings. The fungus, the basidiomycetes, is breaking down that organic matter, essentially releasing nitrogen and releasing nitrate. Roots are taking it up, like, oh, we got free nitrogen here. But it's done in sort of circular fashion, or semicircles or arcs. Type 1, dead rings. Type 2, dark green rings. Type 3 are the mushrooms popping up. And you see a photo here. You can have all these visual symptoms occurring at the same time. Again, these fairy ring fungi, you find them in lawns, especially after a rainfall event, they'll pop up. I love the picture here. Chrissy sent me this picture. fairy ring and dogs in a lawn. That's awesome. Notice the nitrification happening there, the fungus breaking down that soil, releasing nitrate. Wet, dry weather patterns, it rains and then it dries, and then sites that are low fertility, low mowing height, heat stress, drought stress, especially soil moisture stress. These are conditions that favor fairy ring. We tend to see them spring and summer. You can also see them in the fall, but again, there's no rhyme or reason. And sometimes they'll just go away. You'll see dark green rings and they'll fade away and the turf is fine. Sometimes these dark green rings will progress into dead rings. Then you have to sort of either dig it out by hand with a shovel, that's not pleasant, or slice seed into it, recover. Again, you can use fungicides as a preventative or curative approach, which we'll talk about in a minute. This is one of the biggest culprits here. Look at the thatch, the thick thatch in this plug. Fairy ring love that. And here's a plug that's been incubated, and you see the fairy ring fungus just colonizing the thatch. So culturally, one of the things you can do, if you have lawns that you commonly see fairy ring, take a look at the soil, and this may be one place to start, try to manage that disease. So let me real quick, the time I have, and I want to make sure we have enough time for questions, was looking at the fungicides for lawns, and we don't have that many as we do for golf courses and for athletic fields, but we do have some. For example, FMC, Heritage, Headway, these are granular products, and some of these are also, they're all available also in liquid form. I wanted to focus on the granular because I know in lawn care, this is used a lot, but that's changing with the ride-on sprayers and things. It's easier and more convenient now to make liquid applications. But if you look at products like Fame, that's the trade name. Fluoxystrobin is the active ingredient or the fungicide, the actual fungicide principle. You have Heritage, Headway G, Pillar G, others. There may be others here that I'm missing. I don't think so. There might be one or two others. I think Syngenta has one that's coming on the market soon. But these are the common ones that are used around here in the Mid-Atlantic region for lawn care. I just want to highlight some, not to pick on anyone, but if you look at the Fame granular fungicide, I want to emphasize, and when I talk to my lawn care folks and the Lawn Care Association of Pennsylvania folks, we talk about the information on the product label, how important it is to know and understand it. Always read these product labels. I know it's a pain. I talk about this in my turf classes. Information can change year to year on these labels, rates and timings, and they might add diseases or take some away. There always might be some changes. So always have a copy, print this out, or have it on hand, look at it. You'll see that there's Fame granular fungicide. There's information about what it does. Here's the active ingredient, fluoxystrobin, of course. There's all kinds of information, safety information. Of course, take precaution. But look at the directions for application of turf. Now, this particular fungicide controls a lot of diseases, and many of the ones listed are very sort of, let's call them broad spectrum. They'll control more than one disease, but you have to pay attention to the rate. Let's say for brown patch, pounds of product per acre or pounds of product per 1,000 square feet. I like when the labels give you both options, but there's a low and a high rate and an interval of 14 to 28 day, and pay attention to the remarks or the instructions. Apply when conditions are favorable for disease development. Okay, that makes sense. You don't want to apply this product in January or February when brown patch is typically going to show up in June, July, and August. Again, it's common sense, but you got to read the label and you got to understand the label. There's instructions here for different diseases and how to apply them and when to apply them. And this goes for all, not just the Fame label, but every product, every fungicide I listed has a label, of course, and there's information on that label. So please, please, please take a look at that. Also, there's the directions for use. I want to point this out. A few years ago, a friend of mine, his father made an application to his lawn. It was one of those weed and feed products, the fertilizer with the herbicide component to it, and bought it at Home Depot or Lawn and Garden Center, whatever. Made an application to the lawn, had a drop spreader, basically it was a drop spreader, and made 2 passes on the lawn, and the whole 50-pound bag of product or whatever was dispersed. lo and behold, there was 2 dead strips there. Had a nice conversation with the gentleman. The bag said, we'll treat 15,000 square feet. He made 2 passes with his sort of walk behind drop spreader. But I had to have a little conversation here that the bag says it will cover 15,000 square feet, but it's up to you as the homeowner, as the applicator, to evenly distribute that product over the 15,000 square foot area. The bag and the drop spreader is not going to do that automatically for you. But we have this conversation, and these things occur. So I know this doesn't happen with you folks, you're professionals, but I see it a lot with our homeowners. Anyway, so that kind of gets us to the end here. I just want to remind you, cultural practices, mowing, fertilizer, irrigation, all those things in lockstep. That's the good start to mitigating or minimizing disease symptoms and disease severity. Oftentimes it's not enough, though, to completely eliminate the appearance and the occurrence of these diseases, but it's a good start. Don't forget about the genetics when you're selecting for different species and cultivars. Do some homework as far as which species and cultivars in your region are used more effectively and are more perhaps disease resistant or disease tolerant. Don't forget about soil, especially the root zone and the thatch, and that organic matter management component is very important. Those thick thatch layers, especially Fairing loves thatch, so does Summer Patch. Again, thatch is a great place to harbor all these sort of weird fungal pathogens. Okay, there's all kinds of educational resources, like I mentioned, these webinars, and then using fungicides, as I said, whether you're going granular or the liquid products, read the label, read the label, read the label. And the bottom line is these fungicides work best when all these cultural management practices are being optimized. You'll get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, using these fungicides. Thank you very much, everyone.
Of course. Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you to all our attendees for showing up and participating. We hope you took as much from this as we did. And you all have a great weekend. See you next month.
Thank you, everyone. Yep.